You've tuned in to Stranger Than Fiction News, broadcasting live from the dark side of the planet. We're going to be covering the Illuminati Massacre in Las Vegas. There's been some important updates that we need to cover, as well as other news. We're going to be talking about the Hillary Podesta indictments and the investigation and much, much more. We've also got a very special guest coming on the broadcast. Deep State Agent Smith is going to be sharing quite a bit of information with us, and so we're going to get him on the line here and talk about this story for what it is. So let's see if we can operate this line of communication. Any case, so we've got Agent Smith on the line, live on Stranger Than Fiction News. How are you, Agent Smith?
I'm outstanding. How about yourself?
Well, it's another day in the neighborhood. That's all we can say. So we're going to be talking about the Vegas situation. I know you've got quite a bit to say on that. I'm going to let you roll with it and tell us what you know, and hopefully I'll have some interesting questions to ask. How about that?
Well, first I'm going to roll it to the very beginning on how this came about. On 4chan, there was an individual who started making posts after Halloween, where everyone who, I guess, is sort of within this realm would know, but he goes by the handle of QAnon. He started giving little hints as to what was going on, as to what we could see going on within the current administration and what things to expect. Well, as time started going on from the 31st, he decided to let the cat out of the bag as to what was going on with the Vegas shooting, because most of us, I'm sure, have noticed it is dropped completely from the news. No one sees anything about it. You know, supposedly 58 Americans get killed, and all of a sudden it's dropped off of the radar, and no one has seen anything that's going on. Well, on November 6th, QAnon goes on to 4chan and starts dropping information about what happened. And if you look back and you start piecing everything together, it'll start making more sense. There's a video that is posted on YouTube, and you can look it up. Look for FBI extraction, the Tropicana, Las Vegas. And you will see a guy who is in white shirt and some tannish brown shorts with a hostage rescue team, FBI HRT, in full gear, walking through the hotel. There's about approximately 5 to 7 people, weapons drawn, pointed towards everybody. Well, the individual who was being extracted was a person known as the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He was the son of the king. Turns out, QAnon starts telling everybody that the Vegas shooting was not just some random guy who got mad because he lost his butt in gambling or anything like that. It was a failed assassination attempt. You have 1,100 people in Saudi Arabia who've been arrested. And QAnon sort of goes on and explains exactly even how the arrests are tied into this. But if you look at the news and what was going on 4 or 5 days prior to the arrests, Jared Kushner had a secret exit and went over to Saudi Arabia. When he goes over to Saudi Arabia, he went and he met with the king, and then a couple of days later you have these mass arrests. Mm-hmm. Well, all the information starts coming out about how there was this assassination attempt. The Crown Prince was on the 33rd floor the night of the Vegas shooting. Most likely, either he just decided to go to Vegas for a business deal. No one's given an exact specifics on why he went there, but we know he went. We can see images. You can do facial recognition. I've seen pictures where you can take an image of him and pictures of the Crown Prince, and match them up, they look exactly the same. So that part has been validated. And when you have people coming in and piecing things together, for example, the helicopter that you see in between the buildings and that later lands on top of the Mandalay Bay. It was run by a company called Maverick. The individuals who got on it were armed. One of them even, there was a manifest that showed one of them even checked out had a M249 with him, which is a 5.56 fully automatic machine gun that we normally get within the military. Well, some people within Saudi Arabia yesterday admitted that while Talal, one of the Saudis who was arrested, while he was interrogated, he admitted that he had sent an elite Air Force assassination squad, for lack of a better term, to Las Vegas, and they were there. And now, at the same time that the Saudi prince had checked in to Mandalay Bay, 30 FBI agents had checked in. So the FBI was present. You have Paddock, who a lot of people speculated was former ANON, or former had some sort of ties within the FBI doing undercover work, possibly gun running. It was confirmed he has a business. He had a business that was registered in Las Vegas called Paradise. It was Paradise Resort. And Paradise Resort is in Indonesia. Now, back in 2006, 2007, if you remember in the news, Halliburton and KBR got busted in their involvement with sex slave rings in Indonesia. It was that resort where it happened. So Paddock was also running this underage sex slave resort in Indonesia.
That makes sense because he kind of looks like a bit of a pedo, you know, looking at his wife. I mean, there's a lot of sex trafficking from that part of the world. I mean, that actually kind of makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of people have been talking about this, and we've all seen the screenshots of that version of the story. How, you know, they were involved with the top 4 floors of the Mandalay Bay, and we've all seen like how things are just. It looks like they're boiling out of control in the Middle East right now. There's a huge amount of chatter between, you know, the Saudis and the Iranians, and I think the situation with Iran has a lot of people basically a bit concerned now that they control Iran, Iraq, and basically Syria and Lebanon. So it's got a lot of people concerned, and it looks like, you know, things may go to the next level with Yemen and and talk of ballistic missiles and the like. So I mean, it's something that we kind of have to consider because the story is changing a little bit. Now, what do you think about this happening in front of a giant Illuminati pyramid? Because I mean, from the beginning, we've been looking at this like conservatives were targeted in front of a giant Illuminati pyramid, and that was the motive for the massacre, with rumors of Paddock being some sort of Antifa activist. Have you heard anything about him and his Antifa background or far left background? And who would be targeting? And who would be targeting the Crown Prince in Las Vegas? Do you think?
Well, the people who were targeting the Crown Prince were the Salafist and Wahhabist cells within Saudi Arabia. That's Talal. That's Bakr bin Laden. Bin Laden's brother was one of the people who were arrested in this as well. There are about 1,100 people who have been arrested so far in Saudi Arabia. This is basically, the Saudi king just basically arrested all of Saudi Arabia's deep state. And these are, because if you look back through the history of Saudi Arabia, after the Sykes-Picot Treaty in Europe after World War I, whenever they started breaking up the Middle East, they broke up Iran and Iraq, and they started putting, Sunni, Shia, Kurds, all of these people near one another within the same borders instead of separating them like they were during the Ottoman Empire. They basically put all these people next to each other, and this sort of tied in with Albert Pike, because Albert Pike talked about how they all needed to be put towards each other so they could be inflamed and could be used for the planned overthrow of basically the entire world to create the new world order per se. And you have all of these tie-ins with, the Talal. Talal had funded most of Hillary Clinton's campaign for presidency. I think 25% of her donations came from Talal.
That was the super rich guy that everybody's seen, like in the news, right?
He owns part of Fox News. He owned a big chunk of Twitter. This dude owns a lot of things in America that pretty much everyone can sit back and look and say, "Hey, this is controlling things."
Well, this is going to piss off a bunch of people. I mean, you can imagine. I mean, they basically took out one of the big players of the deep state over there. This may escalate things around the world, and we may see some blowback from this. I mean, there might be a new war in the Middle East over this kind of stuff. You never know.
This is why if you remember, Antifa was claiming they were going to overthrow Trump on freaking 11/4, and then it flopped. Nobody showed up because there was no money, because the people who were financing it were all of these guys. So that flopped, and that's why all of these little pieces that you could see, and that was another thing that came out from this. All of the anti-fracking. Because all of this has to do with one thing. It has to do with OPEC. Yeah. Because OPEC had control over the United States in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, and it started faltering whenever we started pushing for our fracking technology. So what did the Saudis do? These deep state guys started funding the environmental groups to be able to go out and be anti-fracking. All of these protesters, I think even to a big degree, even like the ones in South Dakota, all of these for the Exxon or for the Keystone Pipeline, when they were protesting out there, they were all being funded by these same exact groups, and that was why. And I was actually involved in this, but at one point the Saudi they were trying to push for. Do you remember they were pushing this bill called the JASTA bill, and they were trying to make it to where they could sue Saudi Arabia. And granted, it has some big ramifications for military types, because if you go to a foreign country, you have what's called a status of forces agreement. And if you say you get drunk and you wreck a car, if you're in a foreign country and you get drunk and you wreck a car, a status of forces agreement keeps you from being prosecuted by the local law, and you're prosecuted by U.S. law. But because of this JASTA bill, a lot of these countries are going to start throwing that out of the way. So our guys deployed to Yemen or Turkey or all these different countries that we're in. If somebody does something out in the town and they get in trouble for manslaughter or drugs, any stuff like that, instead of them being charged under U.S. law, they could actually be charged under foreign law for their actions in those countries. But there was a big underground rumor, and it's starting to look more like this is what it was, is that the Saudis were giving money to lobbying groups to try and keep the JASTA bill from being passed, because they didn't want. The whole purpose of it was to allow 9/11 families to sue Saudi Arabia. Well, a number of the people who just got arrested in Saudi Arabia, by documents that you can see in WikiLeaks from the leaked Hillary emails, they knew exactly which Saudis were funding 9/11. Talal was one of them.
Okay, we're going to get into Hillary, Podesta, and all of that stuff, but I just kind of want to stay with the Vegas thing a little bit longer. Now, do you think, like, during the assassination attempt, they were going to try and make it look like a stray bullet hit the guy? Or do you think they tried to storm his suite as well? Because now there's like a fourth timeline that doesn't make sense. They said that cops are on the floor before the shooting even began, and that was something that.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, how do you think they were gonna operate this one? Stray bullet or storm the room? So
they have these. They were going to storm the room. They were in the floor down below. They wanted this guy to get the weapons there, to be able to buy the weapons, because under gun running operations that DOJ and the FBI and all them were involved in, that's how they supposedly claimed they could map terror networks, by selling these weapons and seeing where they would show up, right?
Yeah.
So Paddock is there to sell weapons to terrorists, and these dudes show up. And it may not ever come out, but I'm about 99% certain that dude they call Jose Campos,
yeah,
I'm willing to bet his real name is going to be a Saudi Arabian name, because it does not. A lot of people are already saying he did not get shot by Paddock. He did not get into a gunfight with Paddock. The bullet holes in the door. There's one image you can see about 200 bullet holes in the door of the hotel room that he was in. The problem is all of those bullet holes are on the double door in the hallway once you come into the room. So someone had breached into that front door and got into a firefight with that first room that you could see all the weapons and the windows were at. Paddock was laying on the floor there dead. He was already dead. He was killed before this even happened. That's why the bullets, if you see the few pieces of brass, which is really odd in itself, there should be about 1,000 rounds of brass in there.
Yeah.
But you only see about 5 or 6 on the floor, and they have no blood on them, but they're sitting in a pool of blood.
Yeah.
The other thing is, the pistol is on the right-hand side of Paddock. Paddock was a lefty. If you look at the picture of the note sitting on the desk, the pen is on the left-hand side of the paper. Paddock was a lefty.
Yeah.
All of those rifles that were in the room with the bump stocks are made for right-handed shooters. If you're using a bump stock, they come in right-hand side or left-hand side because of how your finger sits in the trigger. It's slightly one side of the bump stock's further back than the front, depending on what side you shoot on. So all of those rifles were made for a right-handed shooter, but Paddock was a lefty. The gun is sitting on the right-hand side of Paddock while he's laying on the ground. So he couldn't have shot himself. He was left-handed.
Yeah, well, you've brought up some interesting points, and we've talked about that, how the suicide looks staged and the gun is isn't near his left hand, and there's a bunch of things that just didn't seem right. I mean, there were other people that said, well, perhaps he brought up that many guns because if he went full auto and in bump stock mode, he would have to go, the guns would jam and he would need that many. But the sounds, it sounds like an M240 as well as, ARs going off that night, M249. And so it's just like, there seems to be something more to the story, and I think that the Campos thing is pretty interesting because he fled to Mexico, he disappeared for a while, everything seemed really weird about the timeline concerning him, so he automatically becomes a person of interest in this case, and the interview
the guy that went on Ellen that was supposedly Campos, if you look at him, it's a completely different person.
I mean, it looks weird, and the whole thing looks weird. That's for sure.
Campos had moles on his face in specific places. So when you look at the police images of him right after he got arrested, and then you look at him on Ellen, it's two different dudes. Now, with the Campos stuff, you actually brought up one other, or not Campos, on QAnon. You're talking about the Podestas and the Clintons.
Yeah.
Now, here's one other thing that's been coming out, and this was some of the predictions that Q had made recently. And if everyone's trying to look and they want to start piecing this stuff together, do a search on Twitter for the hashtag #FollowTheWhiteRabbit. And you will start to see how all of these things get pieced together. Now, and this even goes all the way back to JFK. One of the things that Q had talked about was JFK, I'm sorry, not JFK, scratch that. Jared Kushner. He's talking about Jared Kushner going to Saudi Arabia. He was talking about the ports of transfer. The other thing has to do with when they talk about the White Rabbit, one of the clues he gives is he says Alice in Wonderland. And one side note, Alice in Wonderland, written by Lewis Carroll, that whole story is actually a pedophile story about a guy who was in love with this girl Alice, who was his 9-year-old niece. So Alice in Wonderland is actually a pedo story, and that this is sort of how far all the crazy pedo stuff within the country is going on. That's why I like one of the things that Q talks about. Saudi Arabia donated money to the Clinton Foundation. Well, now the Clinton Foundation has been failing because, of course, now they can't peddle their wares through her. So who's the next person that's taking it up? John McCain. The John McCain Institute is taking over for the Clinton Foundation for all of their pay-to-play stuff. So is the Pelosi Foundation. And this is stuff that has been specified by Q. Then you have the Bush family who've come out against Trump because the Bushes were working. George H.W., he was part owner in Zapata Oil, which was also owned by the Bin Ladens. You have one of the other things he was talking about, and I don't know if you saw this in the news yesterday, but BBC reported it, so I've already gotten triangulation on this story being true. There was a helicopter crash right over the Rothschild's house. Mm-hmm. Speculation is that Rothschild was in the helicopter. But 3 days prior to that, there was some aerial pilots who had taken this picture, and there was a drone basically spying on the Rothschild estate that took a picture of these jets that flew over.
I don't think they live there, though. I mean, I saw the story, but I don't think they live there because if you look at Google Maps, it's like a bunch of tourists there all the time. I think that's just like, you know, some kind of heritage site that they own. But I don't think they live in that place. But I saw the story, and they said it was like the most senior like flight instructor of the entire country of the UK that basically taught everybody else how to fly. So I'm not sure exactly what happened. I mean, it's a sad case. We saw the details of it. I mean, we were interested because people were talking about it, and we looked into it, and we didn't actually see anything other than a student and a some sort of instructor. But you never know with these kind of situations. We're not going to speculate on what might have happened there, but it is interesting. I didn't mean to run that into a tangent, but what else you got, Agent?
Well, and so there's a lot of stuff that's coming up. One of the posts that Q posted at the very end of it, he signed it 41020. Oh. And of course, everyone sort of flipped out because if you look at the alphabet, what is 41020? DJT. So of course, everyone started thinking, well, QAnon's Donald Trump. No, it's actually the Hebrew characters, but it's written in reverse. So if you find the Hebrew characters that tie into 20, 10, 4, you'll actually see what he's trying to say. But
what's he trying to say?
Also, it has to that salvation has been delivered through with open hands. Salvation has been delivered through the door. That is what 20, 10, 4 in Hebrew characters mean.
I guess that's cryptography. I guess you have to have like a degree in cryptography to figure that stuff out. Some people are really good at that. Others, kind of laugh at that. But interesting point. So what's the speculation on who this QAnon is, then, to keep it?
Well,
we don't know.
I don't really exactly get the guy. No, I know who he is.
Yeah, we don't want to
I really don't want to give him away.
Yeah.
Because he's sort of tried to give himself away.
But
I don't think it's very smart.
What's Q clearance? What's the QAnon a reference to, and what's Q clearance so that people can understand? Because I think more than the layman out there, the general public. So they need to start from the letter A on this one. Who is QAnon, and why is this important?
QAnon went on and talked about having a Q clearance. A Q clearance is the highest alphabet clearance that you can have. And basically, there's a handful of guys who get this kind of clearance, and all of them are at the very top of anything within the intel realm. And a lot of people have speculated, a lot of people were looking at, okay, well, why did Trump leave his cushy world and become the president so he could be dogged every day and all this stuff? Trump was recruited. He was recruited to do this because we have, for everyone talking about the deep state, one thing they aren't talking about is there are good guys within our services. There are good guys in the intel realm. There are good guys at the NSA. There are good guys at the CIA. But all you ever hear about are the bad guys. And so QAnon has been working with the good guys, trying to help Trump in taking down all of these bad characters. Because for the past 40, 50 years, our country has been controlled by people who don't believe in our Constitution, who don't believe in us living in a constitutional republic. They wanted to turn this into a democracy before they turned us into a democratic socialist government and then full-blown communist. And if there's an old book written in 1957 called The Naked Communist, and they had about 150 goals for the United States. And out of all of those goals, out of the top 40, almost all of them have been completed already. Looking at the object, making porn normal and accepted and easily accessible, getting rid of the family unit of a mother and a father taking care of children, because they believed that the government is the only ones who can take care of children correctly so they can be able to brainwash them and control them. But then you also have the other parts where you have politicians who are being controlled by their existence within the pedophile realm. And that's been one of the other things that Trump's been attacking, and it's been really quiet in the mainstream media, but Trump has been toppling all of these pedophile rings. That's been one of his major focuses, not just because how jacked up it is for people to do that to kids, tying it into Project Monarch, programming children to be assassins by putting them through traumatic situations. There was a secret book, I think I talked about this before, and this ties back to JonBenet Ramsey, because JonBenet Ramsey was killed by the same cult that Hillary Clinton's a member of, called the Temple of Set. There's a book where a guy, he goes by a name called Montegraph, and he admitted about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. The book is actually called Two is Too Young to Die. You can find it on Pastebin because they took it off of Amazon like less than a day when the guy tried to publish it. But in it, he admits what happens, and that's why if you go back and look through, there's a picture of a fish in JonBenet Ramsey's left hand. That is a symbol of the Temple of Set. And here's why that's important. QAnon has been going on about that as well. And there's one post that he made on November 11th where he was talking about who the puppet masters were. That is the House of Saud, the Rothschilds, and Soros. He tries to talk about their slush funds, war, environmental PACs. All of those are what has been feeding the eye, as they call it, the New World Order, as they say. It's also known as the Eye of Providence. Then he goes on and he talks about the temple, Epstein Island. Remember, Epstein Island only has a temple on top that you can see. And he said, Epstein Island, what is a temple? What occurs in a temple? Worship. Why is the temple on top of a mountain? How many levels might exist below? There's a whole underground infrastructure on Epstein Island. And that has been one thing that hasn't come out yet. What are the significance of the colors, the design, and the symbol above the dome? Because on top of it, it's blue and white. If you Google Epstein Island, you'll see an image of this temple, which is a recreation of an old Greek temple. It's a sacrificial temple. So Epstein Island and like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and all these other people who went there, they were basically involved in satanic sacrifices at this temple. That was the exploitation of children ties in with was it they call it Bohemian Grove?
Exactly.
It's a lot of these.
I was just going to say that because there's witnesses of people that have been sexually abused not only by the Clintons but by other former presidents that were part of the same club, and they named Gerald Ford and even Reagan, and these are the same people that you see at the Bohemian Grove. And it's really, it's kind of tough to take as a conservative. Most people loved Reagan and stuff like that. But seeing the pictures there at Bohemian Grove and hearing these witnesses, testify to this exact same thing, I mean, it basically tells us that, it's more than likely what's going on with these people, for sure. Keep going.
Well, and that's been sort of the crazy part in this too, because who's been one of the big vocal people about being anti-NWO? It was Vladimir Putin. Putin has been coming out talking about he was going to take out the NWO and all this kind of stuff, but you could find images of him and George Bush in their Masonic garb together.
Well, wasn't that like one of those like visits to the Philippines or something like that, where they all dress up funky?
Right. They wear their Masonic robes and they do their Masonic rituals and all that kind of stuff. So we know that the Bushes basically were involved in their extension of Nazi programs, because it was Bush who was a part of the changeover from the OSS, who was actually constitutional, to then the creation of the CIA after Operation Paperclip, and then they brought all of the Nazis over under that.
Well, that's a very important factor, because anybody that watches the documentary Hitler and the Occult that was published by the History Channel, I mean, details fully the links between the Nazis and the occult and all sorts of mystical religions and sacrifices, and we brought all these people in. But I think it was kind of like that even before then, because you look at the first presidents, they were all like Masons. You've got the architecture of Washington, D.C., the streets that look like a pentagram. You've got the Masonic Temple 33 blocks away from the White House and all of that stuff. I mean, it seems like this country was basically born that way, unfortunately. And I think they just sold us the story of the revolution to make us think that we're actually independent. But I think we're still part of the Commonwealth, if you know what I mean.
Originally, we were supposed to be broken from the Commonwealth. If you looked at George Washington's lineage, George Washington was the 54th descendant of Odin. Okay? Mm. Odin was a real man before he became a god, before he died, because back then there was this belief that certain people would die and ascend and become gods. So Odin, when he was a human,
is this Greek mythology? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the story.
No, this is Odinism. This is actually part of my own ancestry. This goes back to Norway and Iceland.
Okay.
And the Viking gods. Thor. Odin was the father of Thor. And George Washington was the 54th descendant of Odin. But he was also a Mason. But the problem is, the one thing you won't see in history is George Washington was killed before he became president. Well, before he became the 7th president. There was the 8th president. There were 7 other presidents before George Washington. George Washington was not the first president.
Shut the front door. Shut the front door. Tell me this one. Okay.
And as a matter of fact, Barack Obama is not the first black man that was a president, but the 3rd president of the United States was a black man.
Jefferson? Is it Jefferson?
No. The first true 3rd president. Hold on, let me...
Well, are you talking did they have presidents while they were colonies, and that's the first president of the colony?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, those were our first presidents.
Yeah.
And one of them was a black man.
You don't say.
Yes. And when George Washington was supposed to become a president, he was killed during the Revolution. And so they had to put someone in who looked just like him. But very conveniently, the guy who looked just like George Washington went by the name of Adam Weishaupt.
Adam Weishaupt?
Adam Weishaupt, yes.
The same guy that was like part of the whole Illuminati founding of the Illuminati and Freemasonry, is what you're saying.
He founded the Illuminati and was kicked out of Bavaria when they found out that he was creating this group. Yes.
Okay, so he came
And
to
he
America
looked at-
and he assumed the role of George Washington. So you're saying our first official president was actually a replacement, and it was the leader of basically the Luciferian Empire.
Yes.
That's fucking new. That's fucking new. Pardon the language. And that's why we've got a pentagram in Washington, D.C., and that's why we've got the Freemason Temple 33 blocks away. I'm going to have to look into that. That is the most original account the historical account that I've heard thus far. Is there any sort of evidence that we can...
There's a ton.
Okay. Where can we find it?
There's a bunch of... There's some books. I'll send you the links to the books and some of the information that shows this. Even
titles.
the pictures.
Can you just tell us the titles? Can you tell us just the titles so everybody can... We're on air. We're not just having a conversation.
No, I know. I gotta... hold on. I'm pulling up my library of things here.
But okay, I'll talk for a little bit. And then you can give you a few seconds to get that information, because that would be a whole new twist to what we've been thinking. And I've been, like many people, been suspicious about this whole Freemasonic influence of our at the beginning of our country. And it's something that we kind of overlook just because it was so long ago and everybody loves George Washington. But it does seem rather suspicious, and there's a giant, Freemasonic George Washington temple in D.C. that looks spooky as hell that people can visit. And the Washington Monument, of course, looks like an obelisk, which comes back to all of this Egyptian mythology and the cult of Isis and the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill, and even the Illuminati massacre in Vegas, believe it or not. So tell us.
Well, and here's the other weird part, too. What was Adam Whiteside? Do you know what he was religiously?
I couldn't tell you. I think he was a Luciferian, to be honest with you, so he could have been something else originally. But
he was Ashkenazi.
So, that kind of reminds me of the cult of... there's a whole cult of former, believers that went apostate. I'm gonna have to look at that one. Yeah, but go on with that one.
He was Joseph Stalin was Ashkenazi. Adolf Hitler was Ashkenazi. It's this idea, the undertone about the secret Jewish cult who's involved in trying to do all these things in the world. That is their bloodline. And they're the ones who were kicked out of Babylon. They were part of the tribe of Judah. They were banished because they worshipped Moloch. What does Moloch require for a sacrifice? He requires children to be sacrificed. That is why at Bohemian Grove they have a giant statue of Moloch, because they are all part of that same ideology that was responsible for the creation of communism, that was responsible for 100 million deaths that have taken place in the world. All of these different cataclysms that have gone on, that a lot of people, it's basically, you have the Catholic Church, and then you have the Jesuits. And the Jesuits are, you have your white pope, who is the pope you see all the time, and then the guy behind him who's the black pope. Which now we're in a paradox, because the white pope was the black pope. So you have the Catholics and the Jesuits who've linked up together, and that's why this Catholic priest is such a whack job, because the Jesuits are not supposed to have the capability of becoming the Pope and being in charge of the Catholic Church. But after they overthrew the previous Pope and they put this guy in, that's where a lot of these problems with the Church have come from. Because this Pope previously, he was involved in the sex slave trade in Argentina. And they just released documents here recently about his involvement. He was taking kids out of Argentina while that country was going to crap back in the 70s, and was taking these kids and selling them off as sex slaves, which is also, of course, still tied into Project Monarch, but on a global sense. Now, going back to Adam Weipsut, there's actually a ton of different places you can find it, and there's even an Alex Jones episode where he was meeting with he had an interview with an Illuminati researcher named Mark Dice, and they're saying Mark Dice even specified that George Washington was not who became the president. Washington fought against the Illuminati, and he tried to control the American Revolution, but then Weipsut had taken over. That's why you have the Whiskey Rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion was where people thought, hey, here we have a free country, we can do these things that we want to. And Weipsut, who was as George Washington, he goes and basically squashes all these people who were making whiskey and didn't want to pay duties to the U.S. government. Okay. Because that was what our...
Okay, hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt about the Whiskey Rebellion. I know that's a fabulous time in history, but I kind of wanted to backtrack a little bit about, the Weishaupt conspiracy, because there's a lot of stuff that happened at that time. That was around 1776 or something like that, and it's about the same time of the French Revolution as well. And there's this huge Illuminati Freemasonic undertone all over Europe and in America that people should be aware of, as well as all of these cults that are basically anti-Christian in nature, and they're basically apostates. So it's kind of everything that we're seeing these days. There's good and bad people everywhere. Every agency, every corporation, every town, there's good and bad people everywhere. And even in churches, you had evildoers infiltrate apostates that basically have run amok these institutions and have tarnished their reputation forever. I also wanted to add something about a cult called the Sabbatean Frankists, which is a huge part of Illuminati history that everybody should be aware of. If you look at Sabbatean, Sabbatean, so it's kind of tough, Sabbatean Frankist Illuminati history, that kind of starts in the year 1666, if you can believe that. And that guy was a professed anti-Christian, so to speak, an antichrist figure that ended up, he was Jewish, and he ended up living in Turkey and was forced to convert to Islam. But he was basically the dark side of the force for that part of the world. And I think all of these evil acts that are tied back to that part of the world, whether it be ISIS or whether it be Jewish conspiracies, really come back to the Sabbatean Frankist Illuminati story. And that's something that everybody
and that also had to do with the Rosicrucian branch off, because and they right now they brag to everybody about it, but no one's really seeing it. That show the House of Tudor. So my ancestors were Tudors. Okay, my 25th grandfather was King Henry VII's brother.
Oh, now we know exactly who you are. No, but they were bathing in blood, weren't they? Wasn't that the House of Tudor, or is that a different house? Is that the one?
No. It was the House of Tudor, because you had the House of Lancaster and the House of Stuart that had come together. So they ruled England under the House of Tudor for about 150 years. Now they were French Brits. Oh. So they were all the ones who had married into the British families to be able to have peace with France. So what happens is you have the Germanic Brits who are in power now, that's where the bloody revolution comes from, because the Germanic Brits overthrew my ancestors, the French Brits. But the Tudor Rose was stolen from that family and taken over by another Illuminati group known as the Rosicrucians. Yeah, and so the Rosicrucians, they stole the Tudor Rose, and some of the Rosicrucians were tied into Weipsut and a lot of his lineage. And then one of the other people that's also involved in all this is also Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was after Weipsut had taken over for George Washington. Jefferson became a part of the Bavarian Illuminati and then started creating Jacob. It's called Jacobinism. It's basically a religious form under the Illuminati, and he started pushing a lot of that. So at least our first 5 or 6 presidents were all doing the bidding, per se,
the unthinkable.
Of Weipsut.
The unthinkable. And let's not forget about Ben Franklin, who was living in England pretty much most of the later years of his life, like partaking in all sorts of cult-like sex activities. I mean, I think that was pretty well documented, if I'm not mistaken.
Being a pedophile, he was a pedophile. He had chased French prostitutes.
Yeah, our history our history isn't what we think it is. Unfortunately, it's a nightmare. But
he was like another Joe Biden. He couldn't. He didn't see any girl he didn't believe he couldn't kiss on.
Wonderful.
But he was like the male version of a debutante back then. He's this elite guy who was single and was chasing every skirt he could find. And he's doing this in his 60s and 70s. So I mean, but to a certain degree, yeah, and nowadays you have so many people who focus on all these bad things. But what they tried to do was really good by creating, taking the old lessons from Greece and from Rome, seeing how we failed in those or how humanity failed in those realms, why those empires failed, and then tried to recreate a type of government that would be able to keep that corruption from going on. And that's why when Benjamin Franklin walked out of from Independence Hall, a lady asked him, "Well, what type of government have you given us?" And Benjamin Franklin said, "A constitutional republic, if we can keep it, ma'am, because it's the most difficult to have, because they expect the citizens to be active and knowledgeable in what's going on to keep the politicians in check, as opposed to everyone like nowadays who want to pay more attention to the Kardashians than the $16 million that Congress has had to pay in the past 20 years because all of our congressmen, all of the Democrat congressmen, have been sexually harassing staffers, and a lot of the Republican ones too. But for the most part, I think all the $16 million has been paid for Democrat senators and representatives for sexually harassing staffers. And going back through all this, so QAnon had made a...
Yeah, go ahead. QAnon, let's finish up with Yeah.
So QAnon put out a prediction, and this is supposed to happen Monday. All of the banks that are out there right now, all the central banks, who are they owned by?
I don't want to say, but you can.
The Rothschilds.
Okay.
Every central bank in every country, even the U.S., when the Federal Reserve, owned by the Rothschilds. That's how they make their fortune off of the interest payments, right? Monday, there was a statement that has come out this week by QAnon. Monday, there will be a financial reset. All of the central banks will either go back to the citizens or will be dissolved. You even post a list of every single central bank in every country. Because why did all of our Middle East wars happen? Why did we invade Iraq? Why did we invade Syria? Why did we invade Afghanistan? Why have we been going after Iran? All of those countries had one thing in common. They didn't have a central bank.
Okay, well, hold on. I just saw a picture of Podesta with a fish on his hand, and that made me think of the John Bonet story. But
yes,
as far as like predictions of bank collapses, I never buy into them because they always kind of turn out to be fake. And I think, just by saying that one's going to happen, now the deep state will be looking for the back door or something like that. So I think like that one probably just that one is probably going to work against the whole QAnon thing, but you never know. I mean, maybe he's just trying to scare the powers that be. It's hard to say. We'll see on Monday. We'll see on Monday. We'll see on Monday. I mean, I guess we'll see on Monday as far as the bank thing. But usually
look at Bitcoin this past week. Did you see what happened with Bitcoin this past week?
I mean, it keeps going up. I don't get it.
No, it dropped massively.
Well, there was a crash.
Tuesday.
There's a crash, and then it kind of came back. I think it's at 8,000, but I'm not counting. So,
right now it's almost up to 8,000. Now, here's the crazy thing too. Mark my words: Bitcoin is the world's largest intel operation that no one has ever figured out.
Yeah. Well,
what do they use Bitcoin for? 256 megabyte block of SHA and RSA 256-bit crypto keys, right? If you can't figure out that crypto key, what do you do to get people to do it? You give them fake currency and tell them, here you go, I'll give you this for cracking that crypto key. Now all of a sudden you've got millions of people who are trying to crack them for you.
Well, there was a story of like $300 million of that other cryptocurrency. What's it called? Ether or whatever? Ethereum, yeah.
Ethereum.
That just disappeared somehow due to some kind of crypto something.
Someone triggered the system by sending out a fake verification key, because you can all these crypto systems try and verify you cracking their key with the timetable that it takes for you to crack all of these keys. It monitors everything that you do to try and validate whether you actually cracked it. So this guy sends a fake crypto key into the system, and it crashes it, and they lose 300 million in one instance.
Yeah,
that's one of the things. JP Morgan just got a crap ton of fines from the central banks and regulators in Europe, because now JP Morgan, seeing cryptocurrency going through the roof, they're trying to go over and start investing in it. Well, if you invest in it and you sell it on the market, you're fine. But if you sell it in person, there's a guy in Minnesota that just got arrested for selling Bitcoin to undercover FBI agents face to face, and they'll get you for money laundering. So there's this sort of high risk to everything having to go on with cryptocurrency.
Yeah, let's not go there for the time being, because I think that's going to bore like half the people out there. But it is kind of interesting as far as all this stuff. And I think just a friendly reminder to people out there is there's no such thing as digital privacy. And I just kind of like laugh at the idea of encryption for the most part, because it's just like one of those things where they're just trying to reassure you that everything's going to be okay. But anyways,
some of the times you'll see things on TV like this guy where they're trying to say, oh, well, we can't crack this guy's Apple phone. Don't let them fool you. They're just trying to make people want to buy Apple phones, thinking that it's so secure the FBI can't get into it.
Yeah.
Please, the FBI can plug a device into it. Yeah. They'll crack it within seconds.
Yeah, don't worry. Your communications are secure using this type of network or this type of encryption. And so you can say whatever you want. I mean, of course, they want people to talk because they know everybody's being listened to. And that kind of came out, too. There's all sorts of things that, recently in the news where they're basically taking, everything off the Internet and copying it and dumping it somewhere and, listening to it later. But that's not really big news, but, it is what it is.
Here's a funny one. CENTCOM, Central Command for the U.S. Army, saves everything on the internet, okay? And they save it on a cloud server in Amazon.
Yeah.
Well, they haven't been securing it.
Yeah.
So hackers this week got access to all of this cloud data on everything that they've been spying on globally.
I saw that, yeah.
Because it's not secure.
Yeah, that's just kind of like, part of what we're thinking as far as internet communications. And I think all of the stuff, what we're saying, where we're going, what we're liking with what emoji on Facebook and the like. I mean, all that stuff is being tracked, and all that information is being stored in these data dump sites like Bluffdale and the like, so that basically they can run a simulation of the human domain, as it's called, and basically work out future events like a huge digital focus group, so they can basically fine-tune their propaganda and their Gladio B events through this human domain simulation. And they're using all of our data in real time to do it. But that, hey, that's just another angle to the story.
What did they just start in San Francisco? They now have a pre-crime division.
Oh, yeah. So
they can take your profile of everything you do on your social media, of your text to your friends. Because remember, if you do something wrong on your phone and you get red flagged, they can go 3 degrees of separation from every person on your phone.
Yeah.
So they look at your contact list, they look at who all on your contact list, who they contacted, and then they look at who they contacted. So they can go 3 degrees of separation to see if you're tied to any bad guys.
And it could be it could be a friend of a friend that gets busted and it comes back to you. I mean, you got to think about that too. Yeah. Anyway,
exactly. And then you think about all the stuff that you post. Well, those things that you post, even what you eat, if you look at GMOs, if you look at foods that are out there that have certain alterations in them, all of these guys that have these random heart attacks and different things, it could have been from the food that they were eating, because they know, well, this guy's eating this type of fruit or this type of vegetable. That GMO has this effect on the human body, because when you eat food, it's like putting a program into a Windows computer. But when you eat a GMO, it's like putting a Macintosh program into a Windows system. Your body can't read it. That's why type 2 diabetes has exploded. That's why all of these degenerative problems have been coming out, because we're eating frankenfoods that are messing with the human genome.
I just want to say this. I mean, the moment that anybody walked into or got onto like a site like InfoWars or something like that, you were put onto that red list. Your fidelity cards were red, and now they're using slow kill binary weapons through the grocery store to target individuals. What we mean by binary weapons is they'll take like 2 of your favorite foods that only you get, pretty much, and then it's just left at your grocery store. They know you're going to get those 2 ingredients, and then you'll mix them up by yourself at home. And so, like, all this stuff, all of this stuff.
They'll target the advertising on your phone, because they see you go to places like InfoWars. They see you go, even if you start reading information, if you do Google searches, or if you know how to do Google dorking, all of these search questions that you put in, before you even send information from your phone to the internet service provider, if you're through AT&T or Verizon, any of that, before it even goes to their tower, it goes straight to the NSA.
Why not?
And then they take it and they run all of their analytics. And what do you think fusion centers are for?
Oh, yeah.
You build the list. You build your threat matrix. You say, okay, well, this guy believes in this, so we're going to red flag him because of his potential for later on being manipulated.
Well, and just wait until they roll out Terminators and the like, and of course, your social media is going to be monitored in real time, and if there's an issue, they'll be stopping by. Let's talk about Hillary and the Podesta group in closing. There's rumors of indictments that perhaps they're wearing electronic bracelets and have had their passports confiscated. Do you know anything about that, or anything that you can share?
Yep. Hillary Clinton, Chelsea Clinton, and John McCain all have foot braces, like they broke their foot on their right foot. They're covering up their electronic bracelets. Podesta Group, their website shut down today. Tony Podesta was trying to flee the country about 2 weeks ago. His plane was turned around by military aircraft.
Nice.
And he was apprehended. He is being held. John Podesta, at first they couldn't find him. He was trying to flee the country. He turned up at some conference, and ever since then they've been getting ready to indict him. Right now there are over 1,100 sealed indictments across the U.S. McCain is on an indictment from Arizona and Colorado. Hillary is under indictment. The Podestas are under indictment. All of these people who've been involved in the sex slave trade, all these people who've been involved in the Clinton pyramid schemes, even the lady who's running the Amber Alert. The Amber Alert system, she was involved in the sex slave trade attempts that they were trying to do in Haiti.
Yeah.
And she even got apprehended by the Haitian government for trying to kidnap like 40 Haitian kids.
What was her name? Laura Silsby? No, it was something else, wasn't it?
I think that's who it was. I don't remember exactly. I know she's the lady who's in charge of the Amber
I
Alert system.
remember we covered that during the Pizzagate days, and it was just like you couldn't make this shit up. Who's going to be in charge of finding your missing kids? It's the pedophiles, and of course, like most of the pedophile stuff happens through foster care and stuff like that, and
DCFS.
Yeah, I mean all of that. Nothing is as it seems. In fact, we're living in a nightmare, and everybody should be at DEFCON 2 right now, especially with like the recent attacks on Christians and conservatives in Vegas and in at the Texas church shooting, and even conservative members of Congress. What do you think that was about? Like the attempted massacre of what looked like Rand Paul back in June with the other members of Congress over there during the baseball game. Do you have any intel?
Yeah, and then they attempted it again when Rand Paul was attacked at his house by his neighbor.
Yeah,
they wanted, because Rand Paul is one of the few people within Congress who is working specifically with Trump. Because what does Rand Paul want to do? He wants to bring down the Federal Reserve. Him and his father, Ron Paul, he had spent his entire life educating all of us freaking Gen Xers about the evil of the Federal Reserve and the overreaching government. And that's why I honestly think our government doesn't know how to deal with all of us Generation X kids, because on top of us back in the day listening to, we were like, I think probably the most rebellious. Yeah, our parents were all hippies and stuff who went and protested Vietnam, but they all started becoming drug addicts and I think the best term I use for it is sodomites.
Yeah, well, Generation Z isn't going to help us. They're not going to save us. They're all voting for Hillary. And I think it has something to do with the vaccines, too, because it's in '89 that they started like adding the heavy metals, the aluminum and the mercury and stuff.
And the socialist takeover of the education system, where all the educators...
It's left to us, Gen X out there, it's left to us. We got to save this country because, Gen Z is gonna end this country, so it's X versus Z, pretty much. Where else were we going with the Podestas and their indictments, or did we go?
Well, the weird part on the Podesta stuff, and with all the indictments and everything going on, you have to admit, Trump and all the people who are involved, and I would never play Trump in poker. Because I bet you that dude has the most wicked poker face. Because he plucks everybody's strings on Twitter. He can go. Do you remember the controversy this week when Trump picked up his Fiji water and starts drinking?
Yeah.
Well, the liberals go crazy over it, right? But what fact came out from him doing that? Guess what is the central hub for the sex slave industry?
Fiji.
There
you go.
That's why he was drinking that water. Signaling everybody.
Well, the House,
I know what's going on.
Yeah, the House always wins. Well, we've kind of had our suspicions that he's been like a truther from the beginning, and this is why the entire establishment is just like, basically pissing themselves day and night over his election and our victory in the last election. So. Yeah.
Remember a couple of months ago, I was talking about this with Trump and his uncle John Trump and the books about Baron Trump from the 1840s.
Yeah.
There's all of this stuff in the background that sort of point towards exactly what all had been going on. Trump had been...
If you got a little time, why don't you tell people about that? I'm just gonna step out for like 5 minutes. Tell people about that, the time traveling if you want to. Solar Winds. Go into Operation Solar Winds. You'll blow everybody's mind with that one. Can you get there? Okay, go ahead. Yeah. You rant for about 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Okay. You got the floor.
So Donald Trump had a uncle. His name was John Trump. Whenever Nikolai Tesla had passed away in the Waldorf Astoria, which was owned by a rich guy in the U.S. by the name of John Jacob Astor, who was killed on the Titanic, along with the Guggenheims and the Warburg families, because they were the three families who were against the creation of the Federal Reserve. Tesla and Astor were friends. Tesla passed away in the Waldorf Astoria. The FBI went in and seized all of Tesla's notes. Whenever they needed someone to look at it, they go over to MIT to have a little unknown professor go over all of his notes. The professor's name was John Trump. John Trump looked over all the notes, told the FBI, no, there's nothing of interest here. Well, then about the 80s hit, and then the early 90s, all of a sudden there's this guy on a radio show back in the day by the name, it was a radio show called Art Bell. There was a guy who keeps showing up on his show going by the name of John Titor, who had claimed to travel time. And he gave pictures showing proof of that. He showed the device that he created. There's even patents for that device on a website that he created, and you can even find the patent. So the theory is that John Titor had created this, or John Trump had created this time machine, created the persona of John Titor, and he was going backwards in time. You can see pictures of him wearing Ray-Ban sunglasses back in the 50s, seeing him in the 50s, in the 1800s. There's also other programs supposedly within the CIA where they were taking kids and moving them backwards and forwards in time, and there are pictures of that as well. And then you have Trump, who comes in and he starts putting out all of these crazy predictions. And he was putting out predictions from whenever he was running to become president. And no one understood how Trump could have 100% accuracy rate. Everything he was predicting. It may not be immediate, but in a couple of weeks' time, it all falls out. All of a sudden, everything that Trump was putting out, he was absolutely correct on. And there's this idea that this is why. Plus, you have Baron Trump. There are books in 1840. You can look them up and find them. The Adventures of Baron Trump. The last one that was written about Baron Trump was at 1900. And the book is called The Last President. And in the book, this kid, Baron Trump, with 2 R's, not one, he has a mentor whose name is Donald. He lived in New York City. He time traveled and showed up in Russia. And then started going through, and this is his adventures, and he's talking about what's going on in the world. And then you have now the stuff with QAnon. Who was Q? Q was a character in Star Trek who was an omnipotent being who sees all and knows all. Now QAnon is starting to put these predictions out.
Yeah, well...
So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you've probably blown the crowd away there. In any case, you know, the story is so deep as far as what's going on behind the veil. I'm sure you talked about the Philadelphia experiment and all of this stuff, and Tesla, I think I heard some of that. I mean, there's just so much stuff that people need to be aware of. And, you know, for better or for worse, you got to follow the white rabbit and figure out what's going on out there, because we've all got responsibility to play as Generation X, the last generation that can make a difference in our country. And where else are you going to take this?
And you know, that was the one thing that I find really funny. You know, there was this guy I was listening to today. He was talking about how all of us, like the 80s kids who grew up in the 80s watching these shows, and they're showing us violence and all this stuff, and desensitizes us. And then I sort of think about, okay, all the Gen Xers that I was with in different scenarios, in different places all over the world, that desensitization that everyone went through pretty much made us be one of the last generations who can go through war and everything else and not completely freak out, because I've seen Gen Y and Z kids in war zones, and the first sign of getting blown up or shot at, they completely clam up. And but every Gen X guy I ever saw get shot at or blown up, what do? We start yelling, going, time to have fun. And that's
video games.
But that's also part of the mind, and that's part of the whole mind control thing they talk about with Monarch. And, you know, and train us to be desensitized, so that if we're in war or we go through hard times. And
now, how can we tell? How can we tell if we're dealing with a monarch protege? Is there any way? Are there any like signs, outward signs that we should be aware of? Because I'm sure these people are everywhere.
They say the biggest one is desensitization. Usually those are the people who are going to be your sociopaths, not your psychopaths, your sociopaths. Your sociopath, but that's almost all of Gen X. Most of us were desensitized to the point where we can look at events and just sort of go, yeah, it was messy. There was guts everywhere. There was a job I had at one point where I was cataloging car accidents. I did the investigation on the Ford Explorers when they would do rollovers and the geo trackers. One of them I went to, this lady got thrown out of the back of a geo tracker and thrown down the street, and all of her insides were strewn about this field. I'm walking through the field with a GPS tracker marking where every organ landed, and I kicked her spleen in the grass because I didn't see it. And everyone's freaking out, and I go, it's a spleen. It's just sort of, most of us all have that sort of thing where after a while you just sort of look at it and go, yeah, okay, that sucks. Next.
Well, probably after like the first encounter. I think the first encounter would probably still be a little shocking for most of us, and I think after that we could acclimate pretty well to the situation. But yeah, what can we say about these job experiences that we all have to go through?
But it's always one of those things where you have to build on yourself. You go through one of those things, and the next time, I remember driving down a road and watched a truck in front of me get vaporized by an IED, and there was 6 people in the truck, and we drive by it, and the biggest piece of the guy's an arm and a head about 150 off of the side of the road, and everything else was. Have you ever had chicken breast with seasoned salt on it? It has that orange tint.
Yeah.
All the small pieces of the guys in the truck that were all over the ground that looked like chicken with seasoned salt on it. And I'm like, hey, I think they're serving chicken tonight. And everyone's like, oh, I'm going to puke.
Yeah, well, I think like the only thing most of us could say in a situation like that is, oh, fuck. I mean, you see something like that, and that's all you can really say, when you should be saying like a whole like epitaph or something for the bravery and the loss of life. But it is what it is today, and unfortunately, our society has basically changed all of us into sociopaths, a little bit. But I guess there's worse. Do you know how many years the United States has gone without not being in a war? 10 years, maybe.
17 years out of our whole almost 300-year history. We've had 17 years where we haven't been at war.
Yeah, that might be a problem. I mean, we might want to kind of think about changing that one of these days, hopefully.
Well, but it's being changed for us. The influence of the United States on the global theater now is going by the wayside. But the problem is, who's going to take over? You've got the Chinese who are jockeying for power all over the world, and you've got the Russians who are pushing for power all over the world. If you want to figure out who's trying to fight for the world right now, look at Africa. Africa is the battlegrounds for where everyone's trying to get their last footprint for taking over the world, really. And that's why even that, I'm sort of cautious with Trump and him making his deals with China, although supposedly the Chinese are supportive of Trump overthrowing all of these bad guys, including the Clintons and the Podestas. I think the Chinese are tired of it and seeing what they've been doing for the past 50, 60 years. Because if Hillary would have made it in office, right now we would be in World War III with Russia.
Well, I think the main enemy right now is definitely the Luciferians and the liberals in our country. Undoubtedly, the Antifa, the Illuminati types, and the like. But
right, you have the Luciferians, you have the Sodomites, you have the communists. All of those have sort of taken this leftist idea, and no matter what they say, the communists and the fascists are all on the left. They're all on that same side. If you're a fascist, it doesn't mean you're a right-leaning person. The only ones who are like the ultra-right people are the anarchists, because it's either all government or no government. That's one thing I always laugh about, because they try and say you're right-leaning if you're a fascist. Now, the father of fascism was Benito Mussolini, who said that socialism or communism didn't go far enough. So fascism is just the marrying of socialism and corporatism. So instead of the government owning everything, it's the corporations that own everything. That's why Google wants to make it to where you're not going to own your own car, that we're just basically all going to be stuck in a world where we have Lyft and Uber, and that's the only way we're going to get around.
Yeah, driverless cars and the like. And of course, like that kind of brings us into the next big threat from these corporations, which is going to be Skynet, Terminators, and the like. I'm sure you saw the Slaughterbots video. And the new
yes,
isn't that awesome? But I mean, go ahead.
That's the crazy one, though, because when was the last time the corporations tried to overthrow the United States government?
I don't know. Last year? I don't know.
The business plot of 1933, when Prescott Bush tried overthrowing the U.S. government using Smedley Butler.
Yeah, well, I know Google was heavily funding Hillary in the last election, and that was basically an attempted overthrow that they do every 2 to 4 years during every election, and they're continuing on this year. I mean, they want, there's a silent coup right now going on against our president, and it's funded in part by corporations like Google. That's why we need antitrust laws. I mean, we need antitrust laws to bust up these big conglomerates that are basically trying to doom us all. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, that was one of the things that sort of came out to light this week or last week, when Prescott Bush was busted for his involvement in the business plot of 1933. All of the Bush family was banned from ever holding a government office. They were never supposed to be in politics because of Prescott Bush trying to overthrow the government, because he was a Nazi.
Yeah,
and he wanted America to be Nazi.
Yeah, I mean, that comes back to the whole Operation Paperclip and Hitler and the occult, and I think, like, this was part of the part of the plan from the beginning. I'm sure most people have seen, like, the documentary Everything's a Rich Man's Trick, and basically the Nazis were like a horde for hire. I mean, it was the first time that money could buy out an entire country for a game of Risk, so to speak, and of course it was the occult side of that country's politics that was chosen to prevail, because they wanted a huge occult war that killed a bunch of people, and to bring that stuff over here eventually.
The occult that was running Germany was a group known as, back in the teens and 20s, was a group known as the Thule Society. The lady who ran the group, she was a priestess by the name of Maria Orsic, who supposedly is still alive today and looks exactly the same as she did back then. There's a picture of her with a Rothschild, and she looks exactly the same as the old photos that you can find of Maria Orsic that are out there. And the really weird part about them is they have a device known as the Vril device, which you'll hear a lot of the documentaries and stuff talk about the Vril device. Supposedly the Vril device looks for anyone who has what's known as triple-strand DNA. And that's what the autism outbreak is supposed to be doing, is creating more and more people with triple-strand DNA.
Huh. Well, I guess we'll have to be testing our neighbors here to see if that kind of works out. But I think that you might be touching on something with the vaccines and trying to kind of like eliminate certain genetic types, or perhaps expose them. And I think there's like a whole lot of thing about like the Rh negative bloodlines too. I mean, what can you tell us about that? I think that's a super interesting thread of conversation.
Well, that's where, whenever they say you're a white guy, well, there's different type of white people. You have your Caucasian, you have your Nordic, because your Caucasian are the people who are from the Caucasus Mountains. Those are the ones who show up with the Rh positive bloodline, which is the people whose human DNA is spliced with the rhesus monkey. And that's where when someone like you get an application form and they ask what race are you, and it'll say Caucasian. I always put other. I'm not Caucasian. I don't have brown hair and blue and brown eyes. But that's a sign of being people who are Rh positive, have brown hair, brown eyes, and like Yugoslavia, all the places around the Caucasus Mountains. That is the lineage for people who are Caucasian with Rh positive blood. But also, there's this new thing out called a CRISPR. You look this one up, CRISPR. There are biophysicists who have created this genetic anomaly called a CRISPR, which you can implant into a person and say you're susceptible to high blood pressure when you get older, right? Well, you take this, you can take it by a topical cream, you can take it by water drops, and they take a bacteria and they modify the DNA to be able to target that anomaly within your DNA that's going to cause you to have a heart attack, and that CRISPR goes in and it reprograms all your DNA so you won't have high blood pressure.
Yeah, well, I think that was in the news recently that they did some gene therapy on a living person for the first time, and there's risks to gene therapy because you never know what you're splicing out with these CRISPR types of technologies, because the genetics gets kind of complicated because in the code it repeats fairly often, and you never know what you're going to splice out. But yeah, I mean. What is your DNA saying? It there was a scientist who decoded DNA. If you take your DNA and you look at it as dual binary and you decode it based off Sumerian text, the entire Bible is written in your DNA. Now that's
the Word of God is written within man. So how do you get people away from the Word of God? You genetically modify it and you take it out of their blood. That's why blood is considered such a important thing. That's why Native Americans would never eat meat, and that's why Muslims don't eat meat that has blood in it, because that DNA from that creature, even kosher food, if you eat beef, you have to slit the throat and drain all the blood out, because you will take that coded information in that DNA and it will affect you. That's why you're not supposed to have vaccines, because it has genetic material from other people in it.
Well, and that's
Pepsi.
Well, hold on. I just want to say
flavonoids.
I just want to say that's the reason that they're feeding everybody GMOs too, because you are what you eat. And so all of a sudden, if you're uptaking or incorporating genetically modified foods, all of a sudden you've got unnatural DNA present in your body, and that unnatural products in your body, and that will have an influence on who you are, physically, chemically, at the molecular level, and probably even at the metaphysical, vibrational level, which also is...
Hitler even started that when he was putting fluoride in the water, because the fluoride stops, it closes your third eye, it calcifies your third eye. So if you're drinking water with fluoride, your genetic capability within your body, it's called the pineal gland. If you see the dissection of the human brain, the pineal gland is at the eye of what looks like the eye of Ra within the brain. Mm-hmm. And that is known as your third eye. But whenever you ingest anything with fluoride, and you're brushing your teeth with fluoridated toothpaste, you're calcifying your pineal gland, and you're blocking off your ability for your creator to be able to communicate with you.
And be sure to rinse like 100 times after you brush your teeth. You don't want to be swallowing that stuff. I even saw news articles that said brush your teeth before you eat. That way you can swallow more fluoride. Thought that was funny. And they say yeast is the same, has the same effect. It kind of blocks that third eye metaphysics perspective. And people are wondering like why in the Flacca videos it looks like these people are possessed, is because it takes down their spiritual shields. I mean, these kind of things basically lower your vibration and make it easier for the spiritual parasites to basically body snatch you and take over. And
they even did it to the music. You had I think it was Gehring. He changed the frequency of music because standard tuning prior to 1938 was at 432 hertz. They changed it to 440 hertz because it messes with the normal rhythms of the human body. Music can set your mood. It can even restructure your brain. It can change your DNA. But when you mess with the music, I don't know if you ever listened to them, but Tool actually talks about that. And they talk about the frequency of music and how it's been changed to manipulate mankind.
And to cast spells. I mean, that's something that a lot of the old 80s rockers will tell you. They were casting spells with their music. Yeah.
Music and math were created by the same cult. It was created by the Pythagoras, who Socrates was Plato. Plato was a part of the Pythagoras, and the Pythagoras created math that we have today, but they also created music and the structure of music. That's why Bach was deaf, right?
Yeah.
He didn't write the music because he heard it. He wrote the equations to make the music. All of the old symphonies that were written, they weren't written as sheet music first. They were written as an algorithm.
Are you saying that Plato? Are you saying that Plato was a cult member?
Yes, he was a member of the Pythagoras. They were a secret cult that was just all about math and music. That's all they studied. They said they're the ones. The original pentagram, the upside down star, is a symbol of the Pythagoras. It doesn't have any satanic meaning. It was hijacked. The original meaning of the pentagram has to do with the Pythagoras triangle.
Well, why do the cult members use the pentagram today for their invocations and theurgy and stuff like that?
Because it's Illuminati. It has to do with math. Everything within the Illuminati and the Masons is all math. And so they tried to hijack it and change things, because what have they done as a result? They changed water, which has the capability of fixing human beings. The covalent bond in water, the 2 hydrogens and the 1 oxygen, all sit at 108 degrees in separation whenever that molecule forms. Well, that's wrong. No, I'm sorry, I'm backwards. It sits at 104 degrees. It's supposed to be at 108. 108, it has to do with what's called the golden ratio. The Pythagoras triangle is at 108 at the very top, 36 on the 2 sides. And that creates a harmonic that is healing for the human body. You can heal yourself with the proper type of water. That's where this idea of like people changing the magnetic frequencies of water, that's where it comes from. It's a tie-in to the Pythagoras and how they studied science and math and how it ties everything in the universe together. This is like knowledge that was the standard 2,000 years ago. And then after the Catholics sacked the Alexandrian library and destroyed a lot of the history, all of this knowledge got lost. I mean, right now, a 12-year-old kid, like kids going through school nowadays, they used to be done 2,000-3,000 years ago. They'd be done with school when they were 8 years old. And they were smarter than most kids who are graduating high school now, because they understood math. They knew multiple languages. They would all teach them at these standards, and now they dumb everybody down so they can't get curious about looking into these things. If you asked a college graduate, even with a doctorate for the most part, what Pythagoras created to mankind, about the only thing they'll tell you is the Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah.
But they don't know about the cult and the math cult and the music cults that they had. There's even a video from the 50s with Donald Duck that explains the whole thing about the Pythagoras cult.
What about the cult of Isis? Because I think that's a big one that people just aren't aware of, but we see that even in the Vatican. We see that involved in child sacrifice, kind of like Bohemian Grove.
Temple of Set.
Yeah, that comes back.
It ties directly into the Temple of Set.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that people should be aware of, for sure. We talked about it.
Temple of Set was created by Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, who was an understudy of Anton LaVey under the Church of Satan. That's where Army PSYOPs came from. Colonel Michael Aquino is the one who pushed PSYOPs in the U.S. Army. Hillary Clinton is a priestess within the Temple of Set. Podesta is a member of it. That's why you find that picture with the fish and the 14 in his hand, because that has to do with whenever Set killed ISIS and he cut him up into 14 pieces.
Do they have a headquarters? Do they have a headquarters? Like, is there like a physical place? Where are they based exactly? Can we visit their website? I don't know.
Yes, you can find the Temple of Set's website. Okay,
well, I mean, I think that's something that we should be interested in.
And just Google Temple of Set. It's right there. It even shows all their manuals. It shows all sorts of information into it. But their headquarters is actually in Colorado, not very far from where John Benet Ramsey was murdered.
Well, why didn't they bring this up in the debates? You know, are you a cult member? Are you a cult member? You know, what's up with these Podesta emails? Why did they say that the Russians did it as a cover-up, and why did people buy into it? Because, I mean, they never denied the contents of the Podesta emails.
Because they were working with the Russians. So what does it say in Saul Alinsky's book? You accuse your enemy of what you're doing so they can't fire back with rebuttal. This was straight out of the Alinsky playbook, which was Hillary Clinton's mentor.
And
she was like emphatically in love with him.
And that's why the Antifa are calling everybody Nazis when they're acting like the Nazis. That's perfect. That is. It's Saul Alinsky, for sure. That's exactly what we're saying.
Exactly. And now with Antifa, although I think we're pretty much have seen the end of Antifa because they've lost their funding stream since those Saudis got deep-sixed. The only thing I think that's left really is Soros and his $18 billion that went to the Open Society Foundation. But they're being targeted too because they're going after Soros under RICO laws.
Yeah.
And that's how they can be able to take him down, because under RICO laws as well as the Patriot Act, the actions of underlings can be held. You can charge the leader of a group for the action of their underlings.
Yeah.
So Soros is going to be held responsible for the Ferguson riots, for Charlottesville, all these other places, because whether it was Antifa on one side or the neo-Nazis on the other, they're all paid actors being paid by the same groups.
And when do you think Hillary is going to go to like prison, or there's going to be a trial? Do you have any idea of like when these indictments are going to be unsealed and juries are going to be selected, by chance?
I know the grand jury had already put out all the indictments.
Yeah.
And that they're all over the U.S. I think it's close to 1,200 indictments that are out right now. But I think with Hillary, as well as the Podestas and some of these others, for the sanctity of the country, you'll probably never hear about it. A lot of the arrests you'll probably never hear about, because if they hear about it and it goes out, it's just like Paddock. You know, a lot of the information that came out with Paddock, they didn't want to put that information out publicly because they were afraid it was going to trigger certain cells within the U.S. because of these Saudis that were involved. And, you know, they were trying to put that false narrative out that he was involved with ISIS, that he was involved with Antifa. They're coming out with all these cover stories and pushing conspiracy theories in other directions, so no one could have put two and two together and figured out that it was a Saudi assassination squad who was trying to kill a crown prince.
Yeah.
Disinformation is what our government is the best at.
Well, and the thing is, too, with Hillary is that, you know, we're suspecting that she's got a clone or two. And so I'm not sure even if they did go out to arrest her, that they'd even get the right person. But it'd be interesting to see where.
Yeah, how many times during the debate would she glitch?
Well, and she's not the only one. I mean, there's just tons of reporters glitching. It kind of looks like they live out there or something. I mean, we've shown the video footage of numerous reporters glitching, freezing on air, all sorts of crazy anomalies, rapid blinking, makes us think that there's something else going on, as well as, you know, the Hillary collapse during 9/11. It looked like she was gone. There was even a TV station in New York that announced her death, and then she shows up 2 hours later from what's supposed to be, Chelsea's apartment. But then we find out from Martin Scarelli that was actually a high-grade clinic that they bought out. And the rumor is that it stayed a high-grade clinic to the point that it might actually be a clone clinic. Now, the whole clone story is a little longer to kind of like explain, but the very next appearance of Hillary, her very next appearance after her collapse on September 11th, was in Greensboro, North Carolina, and you can see her glitch off the screen. You can see right through her, which tells us that wasn't actually her. At that event, it was a digital clone, and we've played the sequence quite a bit. And here it is on the left. You can see her glitch off the screen. This was her first appearance after the collapse, which is made us think that there's definitely something going on there. So even if we do get Hillary for prison, it'll probably be her clone, but that's a good start, because then she can't just show up in public and start talking.
Well, and
talking shit.
That also ties into, I think I had sent you that report back last year of the analytics company that Hillary had hired, where they realized that Trump was winning so much there was nothing Hillary could do, and they had a list of like 7 things that they could have come up with to get Hillary put into office, and one of them was an offshoot of Project Bluebeam, which was called Fire Sign, where they could fake an alien invasion so that Hillary could make it into office.
Yeah, I think I remember covering the Fire Sign thing. I think we did an emergency broadcast on that in Lowell. But Hillary's not in office, and that's a big plus. I'm not sure what else you want to talk about. What else is on your mind that you think people should know?
That's about what I got for
this
for
one
right now.
Well, we've got.
Next week,
yeah, go ahead.
This next week is going to be sort of crazy. I don't know if it's going to be public or if it's going to be more underground. So that's what I'm going to be watching out for, is this week what all's going on with the banks, the indictments, and Hollywood, because pretty much we're watching Hollywood in a death spiral, as well as the NFL, as well as look at what Target's done to themselves. All these big major corporations, they're all in downward spirals. The NFL's in a downward spiral. I think the main good parts about those is the fact that now people aren't being zombies in front of the boob tube watching football, and they're actually out doing stuff.
Well, that is reassuring, because from if you look at the mainstream news, you'd think it's basically over. We don't have any hope, but fortunately, there's people out there that are awake, and I think Generation X is going to be the last stand here, folks. It's either going to be us or them. We're either going to be survivors or we're going to be victims. And I think that's probably going to be it for this broadcast. And we've been on here for about an hour and 40 minutes now, talking it up, and we've been pretty much everywhere on this broadcast. I appreciate Agent Smith coming in, telling us what's happening behind the veil. Now, certainly next week is going to be rather active, whether it is, whether it shows up on the streets as another massacre, or if it's just things that we never hear about. Certainly next week is going to be a very interesting week, and we'll all be looking to see on Monday what the markets are like and what happens in the news. But I appreciate you coming on, sir, and I wish people could visit your website or something like that. But you kind of you're kind of like one of those do-gooders that stays behind the scenes. So appreciate you coming on, appreciate your service, and letting us know what's happening from your perspective. So thank you, sir.
And thanks for the time, and everyone take care out there.
All right, and for everybody that's still listening, if you're listening to this,